This video is sponsored by Game Toppers. Turn your own kitchen or dining room table into a premium portable game solution at a fraction of the cost. Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 748. Today we're talking about Nemo's War Ultimate Edition. And this is kind of the third edition of the game, although I don't think it's technically a third edition. Now I actually reviewed this game, I think 10 or 11 years ago. And it was originally published by Victory Point Games, who's now been purchased by Tabletop Tycoon, who then has published, I believe, the last edition and then also this new Ultimate Edition. The designer is Chris Taylor. He's done a couple other board games. I believe he's the designer of the original Fallout game, the original Fallout 1. And then Alan Emmerich, who was formerly or currently with Victory Point Games. He used to own Victory Point Games, now I think he just does some work. He actually designed a lot of the extra stuff here. And then the artwork is actually by Ian O'Toole, who is now kind of like world famous in the board game world. I think this was his first job as a graphical designer in the board game world, the last edition of this. So it's mostly a solo game. Now you can play it cooperatively, you can play it competitively. This has kind of like all the expansions that have come out, and I believe some new stuff kind of bundled in to this Ultimate Edition. From what I know, I have never played the second edition of the game. The rules have not changed between second edition and this Ultimate Edition. And there may be some small changes that I don't know about, but it's largely the same. Now it has changed from the original of first edition, which I played, like I said, 10 years ago, but mostly minor. I mean, I think the changes are significant, but from like a gameplay perspective, it still kind of has the same feel and vibe as that original one. I mean, almost identical. It's kind of cleaned up a little bit and that kind of thing. Yeah, so what it is mostly a solo game. You're playing Captain Nemo, sort of driving around the world's oceans in his super sci-fi submarine. And kind of the linchpin with this game is you are at the outset picking sort of the style of victory that you're going for. So you can try to go for a science victory, a war victory, an anti-imperialist victory. There's like 8 different ones. So you choose that at the outset, and that will dictate how you score points and how much those points are worth. So if you're doing like an exploration type of victory, for example, then you will try to discover different like monuments and things and little kind of hidden treasures and islands and stuff like that around the world. And those are going to score you more points. You might still do that if you have the war victory, for example, the anti-imperialist victory, but it's not going to give you many points if you pick one of those victories versus the other. So you set out with sort of a plan, and then that will kind of dictate how you want to play that particular session. Next time you can, choose a different victory and have a new, totally different kind of adventure, doing all the same kind of mechanics and things like that, but weighing your decisions a little bit differently. So let's jump down to the table. I'll give you a somewhat brief overview. The rules are relatively involved. We'll talk more about that in the review part, but I'll give you a general overview of the game. If you've played any kind of co-op or solo game, it has a lot of those same kind of trappings, if you will, with some nice unique qualities. So we'll jump down to the table, take a look at it, and then come back and I'll give you my impressions and what I think. Okay, so I've got everything set up here, and here is the main board that you're going to be interacting with. And it's kind of a long board. So kind of hard to get into the frame here, but you can see a couple of different parts here. On the left hand side, we've got kind of a draw pile, and I'll talk about that in a minute, with kind of a player aid sort of built into the board here. And then you have sort of your map here. So if we take and zoom in over there, we can see this nice plastic miniature there representing Nemo and his ship. And then you have the various different oceans there. So this is the European seas, the North Atlantic, and so on. And we have some hidden ship markers and some other ships that we've revealed through the course of the game, so be interacting with them there. And then you've also got these different like little pathways, so when you move your ship you can go to the adjoining different regions there. And then there's also some like land areas here, and these are where you might put your uprising cubes onto if you're doing some anti-imperialist activities. You might stir up some uprisings by putting some cubes out in these spots here. And a couple other things to note is you can see there are dice depicted on each of these. So you've got the 5 and then the 3 there, and spots for the treasure tokens. And let's see what else. Some other things will make some of the regions adjacent for terms of placing out new ships like this, but not for Nemo's movement. So when you roll dice at the beginning of the round, you can be putting ships out based on some of the numbers that you rolled there, or possibly if you roll doubles, putting out treasure in the spot that you rolled doubles. If you roll double threes, you put a treasure token out there. And so here's where you spend most of the board kind of driving your ship around, fighting different ships, whether they're merchant ships or warships, or inciting, the rebels and so on, the anti-colonial forces. And then above here, we've got a couple other things, a couple of tracks. So this top track here, your notoriety track. And so as you do combat and other actions that might happen, this is going to move up, and then this will start to unlock, more powerful ships that will go into this draw bag of ships here. And so as you do different actions, the harder ships will come out, and depending on kind of the, like I said, victory mode that you choose, you may actually lose the game and become defeated if you get your notoriety too high. Whereas if you do other modes, then it's good. You raise the notoriety in a way. And then you have these three tracks here. Let's take a zoom in. And these sort of represent, your capabilities to a certain degree. So you've got Nemo, which is sort of like you, and then you've got the crew and the hull of your ship. And so through different tests or during combat, what you can do is you can exert maybe one or more of these and give yourself a dice roll modifier. And you're almost like gambling that resource when you do that, because if you succeed, then you're fine most of the time. And then if you lose, you're going to lose that resource. So you're going to either lose points at the end of the game, you're going to get closer to defeat, for example. So if, first pretend Nemo goes all the way down here, then you've lost the game. And then also your dice roll modifiers are going to start to get weaker. So you can see here, Nemo starts with +2/+2. He actually goes up, I should say. And then the crew goes +3 down to +2 and so on. Now you can take actions to rest and repair and that kind of thing to bring these back up as well. But you're kind of taking a turn off in a sense to do that. So this is where you kind of manage, your crew and your ship and so on. And then over on the right hand side of the board, we've got some other things here. So you have here a deck of adventure cards. You'll set these out aside. You'll sort of prepare this deck over here. It won't be this many cards. I'm just going to set some out here as an example. So just prepare this deck, shuffling in the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 cards, and then any other special cards based on the, again, victory condition that you go after. And so this deck here that you end up with is going to act as kind of a turn timer. So once you run out of the deck, then you're going to get to the finale there and have to do, there's some finale cards here, which I set aside, yep. So you have some of these finales and stuff that you won't necessarily know what it is until you get to the end of the game. So that acts as kind of a game timer as well. And then some of these will have you put out a certain number of cards in this adventure deck, which come out of the same deck. You will take in-game actions and events to trigger those. And so over here we have a collection of treasures. So when you get to one of these little treasure tokens marked here, you actually will pull them out of this treasure bag and then put them out here. And a lot of these are just straight victory points. If we zoom in a little bit, you can see that one there's worth 3 points. There we go. And some of those 1 and 4. Other ones will be monuments and stuff that you might try to seek out. So for example, in this little setup, I have the Explorer option, and you can see there we have the, not monuments, the wonders here. So it's going to be X times 7. So you're going to multiply that number by 7 in that case, whereas if you did the other victory here for anti-imperialism, you would only multiply the monuments by 3, but some of these other ones will change. And then when you draw treasures out here, you get sometimes special effects that'll tell you, something like discard a treasure and draw 2 more treasures, stuff like that. So, and then over here you've got a victory point track, and you can kind of keep track of your victory points during the course of the game there with some of these other little special tokens and stuff. And then down here you have some events will bring some of these special ships into play. These are different colored ships, more powerful ships. And then as you defeat ships, you've got a few different things you can do with them. So if you defeat a ship here, you can start to put them here like so. And if you fill up these columns here, and these are showing the different regions where you defeated the ship. So, you might kind of get a different stack here as you defeat them in different areas. I'll just kind of grab these randomly, you know, like so. And then as you fill up the columns, you're going to get more points at the end of the game for filling a complete column. So you, in effect, want to be traveling and defeating ships in various different locations all over the board. But if you want to, you can also set these aside over into kind of the salvage yard and set these here, and you can spend these ships here that you did not score for points, but you can use these to buy up these cards here. And there's this deck off to the side there of these different upgrades. And you'll always start with one in play that has to do specifically for your objective. So here's the Explore one. And so once you purchase this one, and there's even variants to like start with this one in play, and there's a lot of different variants, which I'll get to. But you get this, so each time you perform a move action, you can move the Nautilus, that's your submarine, up to 2 consecutive oceans, because typically you can move 1 for an action point. So that's kind of the general overview of the board. Now what's going to happen on your turn? So on your turn, you're going to go and draw a card off this deck and resolve it. And these are 9 times out of 10 going to be a test. So you're going to roll your 2d6 there to try to match or beat that number. And that in this case will be a 10. This shows you can exert Nemo and your crew, right? So these show you which ones you can exert to try to keep the die roll modifier higher. And then if you pass, in this case, you're actually going to keep this card and keep it in front of you. And then if you pass, before any future test, you can roll this to add to +3. So you keep this card, or it would be some other kind of event that happens. I'll show you another one. If you fail and lose 1 Nemo or 2 crew. So if you fail, you got to lose that, or sacrifice Dead Land character. So you can see this is Dead Land's temper. And so it gives you a little kind of background story. This is based on the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea book. And so there's some of the characters and things like that from the book. And then at game's end, you put it in the pass pile if unused. So one thing to note here is you can see it has kind of an icon. So it's going to match one of the kind of scoring possibilities here, right? So it's going to match one of those with one or more of the icons that are actually on the card there. And then if you pass it, as you draw these tests and play them, you're going to go into the fail pile or the pass pile. But in this case, you actually kept it. So if you pass it, you keep it, and then you can, before any future test, use it. But at game's end, pass if unused. So if you didn't use it, it will just go to the pass pile. So if we take a look at this one here, example, here's another one. So you can do a test here. In this case, you exert Nemo or the hull. And if you pass, you gain 1 hull. So you kind of repair a hull. And then if you fail and lose 1 Nemo or 1 hull, so then you would put it in the fail pile. And so any icons in here on the upper left will not score, obviously, if it's in the fail pile. But in the pass pile, you're going to take and multiply that based again on over here, whatever multiplier you have to do with there. So that's the first step of your turn, is to go over here, draw an event, resolve it, resolve the test, and then move on. And then you're going to roll some dice, and this could vary, but usually you're going to have 2 dice rolls. And the number of action points that you get is going to be the difference in dice. So let's just pick a random thing. So that's pretty good. So we have a 2 and a 5. So you're going to look at the difference. That means I get 3 action points, because 5 minus 2 is 3. So we're going to set up here and have 3 action points. Now, you can hold 1 action point over from your previous round. You can't hold more than 1. You're always going to reset down to at least 1. In this case, let's say we had held 1 over. We got 3. We're going to add 3. So we'll have 4 action points to spend. And you can spend these to do a number of different things. Moving, doing rest, repair, refit, where you can kind of try to rest your crew, repair your ship. And refit is basically using that salvage action like I showed you over here to spend some of that and then do a salvage. And then this dice roll here is also going to dictate where new ships or possibly new treasures come out and stuff like that. Now you can also have a lull turn where you have a limited number of actions, but some of the actions actually cost you less action points. Everything kind of defaults to 1 action point, but you can't quite do as much as you want there. Now let's just kind of quickly talk about some of this stuff. So you can see there's two different types of ships. You've got the warships, which have an attack number in their upper left. So they have a number here, in this case 6. They have a defense value 9, and then some other things like this is, you can see this type of ship. Now sometimes through the course of the game, this is going to go up, right? So the 9 now is defense and the 7 of attack. If these start to come out flipped on their purple side, and the game will indicate to you when that happens. Now other ships here don't have an attack value. These are just merchant vessels here. They just have a defense value like so. But you can see here you're going to get a notoriety when you fight them, because you're fighting a merchant ship. And you can see it's got a merchant of 1, it gives you +1 treasure, so on and so forth. So what you're going to try to do is roll your 2d6 and try to beat that defensive number. And again, you can exert your various resources up here to improve your dice roll modifier. The warships obviously attack back. I should say they attack first. And then you've got to make a roll there, and then they might try to destroy some of your upgrades and hull and so on. Now some of your other actions are off to the side here, so you can search for treasure, try to rest your crew, kind of get that crew marker back off to the left, repair, get the hull up, refit, and then incite is the other one down here, and that's the one where you try to get some of these uprising tokens out onto the board. Specifically if you're doing the anti-imperialist, then that can be important. And here, this is just a nice little chart. You can see the result here, and again, you can exert some of your resources to improve that. So if you fail miserably, you might actually hurt yourself. So for example, if you're going to repair and you basically roll snake eyes, which is always a fail no matter what, then you'll actually lose a hull instead of repairing a hull, and that kind of thing. So again, search for treasure, rest your crew, repair your hull, refit your ship, and incite some of the anti-colonialist forces. And that's kind of your general game arc. I just want to talk about a couple other little details here that are kind of important in terms of like the tactics and strategy that you can do. One other thing is the special characters. Here you have the special characters. Some of these will give you dice roll modifiers actually after you've rolled, or give you extra action points and so on, and these other things will possibly score you points or interact with some of the different event cards and that kind of thing. When you use them, let's see, this one here, for example, you use that one, you'll gain a notoriety. This one here, your Nemo will have to go down by 1. This special one, Nadine here, if you, it's basically kind of signifying the end of your life there, because if you use him, it's defeat. Okay, so this is a new edition. They didn't have this from what I remember in the original edition. So this is a nice kind of get out of jail free card to use some of these, but you've only got a handful of these to help you there. The other thing to note is there are a few different types of attacks. I'll just show you these here. So you may get eventually access to torpedo attacks and diplomatic attacks here, and then there are rules for that. And you can kind of do this in lieu of your kind of normal attack. And there's also here the idea of like a stock attack, where you can just kind of stalk and fight one ship in the region that you're at and you get a +1 there. Or you can do the bold attack, which allows you to attack everybody in your region, which you might want to do because maybe there's a bunch of weak, merchant ships there or something, and you want to kind of build that up and take them out, maybe in a region where you don't have a lot of ships on that tonnage track, which I showed you, and you keep doing that until you use one of those ships to salvage, and then you have to stop there. So there's kind of two different styles of attack. So you're kind of juggling a lot of these different things. And that's a lot of what this game is about, which we'll talk about in the review, is juggling this sort of real basic game loop with the sort of goal that you put out for yourself at the start of the game. So just one last quick mention here. We have 2 rule books for the game, and I'll probably open the review with this because I don't really like this, how they did it. So you have the basic game rules here, which tells you kind of all the step-by-step stuff that I just kind of went over, obviously in way more detail. And this is written in kind of like a old wargamer style with like, rule 15.6 and all that stuff, which is not terrible. And then you have here this other one, which has rules for the expansions and also kind of all the different ways that you can set it up based on, the victory point approach that you chose and so on, and how to build the decks and all that, and then some of the expansion stuff in here. And then also the cool thing, which I wanted to show you here, is at the back is, let's say you did, I just opened this randomly, here's piracy and here is science, right? And so based on your score, you have different sort of outcomes. So you'll win the game, you could lose the game and not even get to this point, and then you'll win the game and see what your score is. And then based on how well your score is, you may actually have, defeat, failure, inconsequential, all the way up to triumph, and they have that that sort of scale for each of the different victories. So science has defeat, failure, inconsequential, notable, success, triumph. All of them have that. So you're going to win the game, and you can see how well you did. So the idea is that you would play through this multiple times and try to get a triumph for each of the different victory conditions. So that gives you a lot of replayability. So that's also in the back of this book here. Okay, I glossed over some details, but that's pretty much your core loop of the game, the kind of the gist of how you play. Let's go back to my talking head. Okay, so that is Nemo's War Ultimate Edition. A little bit succinct and brief overview there, but hopefully you get the general idea. The core loop is pretty basic and simple. It's just kind of all of the window dressing kind of around it in this case. Now I typically do 3 pillars of review where I talk about player time, play count, and then kind of a general touchy-feely, what is this game like? Well, player count, I've only played this solo. I know this new edition has multiplayer in it, and I think the original even you could play 2-player. But this game is really known for its solo play. Recently, over the last couple of years, I've done a couple of top 10 solo games, and by far, this is the #1 game when people say, why is Nemo's War not on your list? And, well, I mean, the reason it wasn't on my list is because I had played it like 10 years ago in the original edition. I really liked it. I really liked that original one, and I just hadn't had a chance to play the new one, and just kind of been out of my thought process, for the last little while. And actually the publisher reached out to me after my last top 10 solo games and said, hey, we'd like to send you to the Ultimate Edition and take a look at it. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds great, because I remember really enjoying the original one. So I've not played it with all the extra, versus mode and cooperative mode and stuff like that. And I think the game, to be fair, is probably mostly known for a solo game. Now in terms of the play time, I would say it takes, what does the box say? Does the box give you time? I didn't even look. I would say it takes about an hour. This is 90 minutes. It seems to take, once you kind of get the hang of it, you can get it done in an hour. Now, getting the hang of it, that will move us into my third pillar, is I think going to be tricky. So when I sat down to play this, I was a little bit surprised at how difficult the rules were to parse. Now, once you get through the rules, I think it's fine, but half of me is I'm really kind of conflicted about this, to be honest with you, because the original was dead simple. Okay, it was not much simpler. It was simpler than this in terms of the amount of rules. It was just very easy to quick sit down and play in a 30-45 minute type of time frame. It was a very small footprint game. Nice little pocket size. I think it even came in an envelope. Sit down and play. And the amount of game that it had in it for that small period of time was just immense. And I really, really enjoyed it back then. Now they've sort of fleshed it out, expanded it. I think overall the game is better than it used to be. The way that the game end sort of triggers and some of the different ways that you deal with the events is cool, because before you maybe or maybe didn't get an event, so the game was sort of on a different sort of turn track at the end there. Everything else is pretty much the same, the combat and the the way you use your hull and your crew and Nemo and the events that you keep and the upgrades. Well, the upgrades are actually a little bit cooler here because you have the different cards and different types of upgrades and stuff like that, which I don't think they had it exactly like that in the original. But the basic gist is the same. But the problem is I wanted to play this game. Maybe it's an expectation thing, but I would really like for this game to be good as, I don't know, a gateway game or something, or good for new players that aren't really familiar with board games and rule structures and stuff. Because even for me, who's been doing this stuff for a while, I was like, man, this is really tough to parse. And then it was also very hard to find things to go back to. Whereas and I hate to Monday morning quarterback, stuff. I don't like to do that. But the way that Fantasy Flight does their stuff with the general overview, and then you have the fully indexed extra book that was I want to go look up how Nadine's power works or this other power. It's every little bit of the thing is indexed, and you can just go find that thing. But your general core loop, which is pretty straightforward and basic here, is in that basic 8 to 10 page rule book, where here you've got this 30+ page book, and then the setup is in a different book, and that's, I don't really like that at all. But I knew going in, I was like, okay, I know this game is going to be good. It should be good because I really like the original, and everything that I'm seeing is going to be better. And so once I was able to kind of get through and go like, okay, this is actually pretty straightforward. Like this stuff is like getting in the way a little bit. And so actually one thing I did is I went and watched, there's like 2 really good how to play videos. And I was like, okay, I am reading this right. You know, I am getting this right. This is as simple as I think it is. And I watched one of those and like a little bit of the other one. And if you go to Board Game Geek on the page for this, you'll see them. They're like at the top of the list, and they're about half an hour long or so, or even longer, which, you know, but if you can go through that, because I really, really, really want to recommend this game to just about anybody, including people that are new to it. Because once you get into the game and play that core loop of resolve a test, place some ships, place a treasure, you know, then figure out what you want to do with your ship. It's so simple. Do I want to move over here? Do I want to move here and then fight these guys? Or do I want to rest and then do this? And that's really, really simple in terms of the mechanics of it. And everything is laid out really well on the board once you've tried to figure out like, whoa, I should probably repair my hull, you know, because things have gone south. Okay, how does that work? Look down here, little chart, roll, boom, exert, whatever. And then you're done. So once you get into the cadence of it, it really flows smoothly. So I don't want to harp too much on the rule book, but like that to me is going to be a barrier from even maybe like, you know, not even just new people, but just general people that are like, you know, they got a new game and they want to play it and they're like, open the rule book and it's like, oh man, this is crazy. And it's a struggle to get through. So that's a kind of a huge negative, but if you can get through that, I would highly recommend the game because it's really, really fun. And it does, the one thing that it does that it's just, I have a hard time thinking of a lot of games that do this, is the narrative immersion of the game is just so hooked into that initial goal choice. Like I can't think of a game, if I sat down and like searched the Board Game Geek database and jogged my memory for an hour, I could probably come up with a game that did something similar. But I love the idea of you choosing your goal, playing the same game you did yesterday, but with a completely different sort of agenda in mind, right? You have this whole like outlook of the same world, the same sort of concerns and problems and stuff the game is going to throw at you, but you're reacting to it in a totally different way based on, I don't care about fighting so much. You know, maybe I want to go incite the rebels, or this game I want to just tear up the sea and just destroy every ship in sight. Or maybe I want to explore and find these artifacts. Or maybe I'm really into the technology of my ship and getting the different upgrades this time. Instead of doing it where like, oh, that'll help me, so I'm going to try to squeeze that in as I'm doing this other thing. Now I'm really focused in and dialing in on that. And so again, that whole like, again, it's a game loop, but it's also like a juggling loop. So you're constantly juggling and juggling and juggling, and that loop's different, right, for each role that you pick. So all of your decision making, even though it's super simple, except for the rules, this decision making just morphs and then, you know, ticks and tacks and goes left and right based on what you chose as your role at the beginning. And that's just a really, really neat thing. And it also adds to the theme and the immersion of it, because it's like you've set out for yourself a psychology, like a map of who you are as Nemo and what kind of person you are, what kind of character you are. What are you about? Like at a fundamental level. Like, are you about just ransacking everything? Are you an investigative, curious person that's into the exploration and the science? Are you out there, you know, for kind of just the, you know, the joy of it, you know, to explore? Or are you trying to free the different people that have been oppressed by the Imperials? Or, you know, what are you trying to do? And you can sit down and play the game, not only like with those sort of strategic ideas involved, but also it's like just your kind of mental space. And that's a really, really, really neat thing that you just don't really see in a game. Because if you sit down to play a game, let's talk about co-op games like Eldritch Horror, like you're kind of trying to do the same thing as you were the game before. And I love Eldritch Horror or Defenders of the Realm. Like your goal is the same. Your basic same thing is the same. And here, the game doesn't really change so much, but the decision making changes. Those little like right on the edge sort of like, well, should I do this or that? It's like, well, this is what I'm about, this game, so I'm going to do this instead. That's such a neat little concept that I really want everybody kind of to get a chance to try it. So if you can jump over that rule book hoop and get into it, it's not so complicated really at the end of the day. And there's going to be a lot of replayability in here. Like, I didn't even mess with any expansion stuff or anything. I was just having fun picking a role and then going through and just doing the same thing. So the nice thing with the Ultimate Edition is this got all this extra stuff in that I don't know about. That it's probably really cool too. So again, if you could get over the rulebook hump, it's going to be fantastic. I think it's a great addition to anybody's collection, even if you're not into solo games. Like, I can see why I get sort of pestered a little bit about this not being in the solo game, because this is one of those where it's like solo only, you know, even though they've added extra stuff. Like, it's really kind of known for that. So, and I think that's where the game for me is really excelled. It's, like I said, a whole marriage narrative thing. So yeah, I think even if you're not into solo games, is my point, this is a good one to get into and play it, because some of these other games that aren't just solo, they kind of have solo in addition to, where this is kind of the reverse. They're fine and they work well solo, but this is the nice thing about this, where you kind of sit, you know, pour yourself a cup of tea or coffee or whatever, a little whiskey or something, I don't know, and sit there and just kind of be in this little space by yourself. This does that. Like I said, with all that narrative stuff and choosing your goals, it gives you that kind of little cozy moment there. And so I think this could fit in a collection with somebody that doesn't necessarily, you know, play solo games a lot, but this is going to serve kind of that little niche maybe that I think everybody kind of has a little bit of that sometimes. So I want to really recommend it for that kind of thing. But that rule book, man. So again, I'm harping a little bit on there, because once you get through it, I think it's doable. And if you just know, I think as long as you know it going in, then I would recommend. Like, just know going in, because you don't want to open it up and be disappointed. But if you know beforehand, give yourself that extra couple of hours to jump in, and I would recommend it 100% in that case. So anyway, that's Nemo's War Ultimate Edition. Definitely take a look at it. Again, I recommend it with just a little caveat. So thanks.